Our goal today is going to be to talk about how poets use their art form to explore the subtle nuances of death, to deal with all of the problems, all of the questions that people have, and more importantly, how you and how I read those poems and understand them to mean anything significant. We spoke in one of our previous modules about symbolism and the frequent symbols that encompass death. These are the common tropes that we need to learn to expect and read as being death. When we see a poet using wintertime, nighttime, snowfall, blackness, that all those things may suggest to us that the poet is dealing with some of the bigger issues of death. Our biggest stretch for this lesson is going to be psychoanalyzing literature. This is a critical approach, psychoanalytical approach to literature. You might be asking yourself, what is a literary theory? That's an excellent question. A literary theory is a method for reading literature that helps the reader analyze the text. It's what critics and academics alike use as they approach works both old and new of literature. It helps provide a framework to determine what the themes of that text are, and ultimately it helps to create context for the themes. Literary theory is a great way of understanding different kinds of texts. It also helps us understand how critics are approaching texts when we see the reads they take. For instance, if you were to read Hamlet from a feminist literary theory perspective, you would be most interested in the characters of Ophelia and Gertrude and the way their actions are governed not just by the other characters within the play, but their own genders. These approaches help us understand the many different themes that are involved in most complex texts. There are a lot of themes of Hamlet that have to do with identity and royal privilege and masculinity and violence and vengeance. But when we look at Gertrude and we see that she chose to marry someone who was not the rightful heir to the throne and thus push her son off the throne, we can wonder if, as Hamlet says, frailty thy name is woman, or was Gertrude the only person who understood the actual nature of Hamlet, and that her role as a mother saw through Hamlet's youthful inability to lead? Did Gertrude, as a woman, exercise one of the few powers that existed for her in medieval Denmark or Renaissance England in marrying someone who wasn't necessarily the rightful heir to the throne in order to put someone more stable on the throne because she herself would not be allowed to lead? These are the kind of questions that a feminist approach to Hamlet might go into, and the themes we might walk away from the play with that approach might be different than those that we would get if we went at it from another perspective. Over the course of the year, we're going to use one critical theory each 9 weeks as the centerpiece of how we read our text. For this 9 weeks, that is going to be psychoanalytical theory. Next 9 weeks, we'll engage in new historical theory in which we put our texts into the context of their history, something that you would be surprised to learn that many people choose not to do when they read. Third 9 weeks, we will be taking the Marxist approach to literature, which is by no means intended to turn you into a communist. I like the free market as much as the next guy, unless the next guy is Mr. Clark. Nobody likes the free market as much as Mr. Clark. And our final literary theory will be post-colonial literary theory, in which we analyze how power comes into play, particularly between subjugated peoples and subjugators. Our first literary theory is, as we said, psychoanalytical literary theory, in which we think about how the human mind deals with death. And psychoanalysis is going to take us all the way back to one of our good friends. I'm sure you remember him from your intro to psych classes, Mr. Sigmund Freud. What Freud and most of psychoanalysis is going to tell us is that our mind is governed by three distinct parts. That we have the id, the ego, and the superego. And that each of these has its own part to play in how we make our decisions and how we choose to be the person that we are. The id is primal instinct. The id is the part of our beings that is our animal nature. It's the part that makes us afraid of the dark because there are bigger beasts out there that want to eat us. It's the part that makes us attracted without meaning or without reason to that person in the classroom across from us because instinct tells us we need to procreate and propagate the species as much as possible. It's the part that tells us we need to eat another slice of pizza even though we've already had 5 because we don't know when we're going to see food again. These are all the things that govern the id. These are our primal instincts. The superego, on the other hand, is society. It's rules, it's laws, it's things that were taught by our government, things that were taught by our churches, things that were taught by our parents. These things oftentimes go against what our id suggests to us. They put us in harm's way. They ask us to deny our instincts, they ask us to deny our desires, they ask us to set aside our primal desires and our primal instincts in order to do something that's more beneficial for our society. That's ostensibly what rules are for, to govern society and to keep civilization safe. So that brings us to ego. And ego is the confluence of these two other ideas, the id and the superego. It's where our primal instincts, our desires, our drives, our determinations meet up with what society tells us is correct, what our laws, our rules, our churches, and our parents tell us that we should do, and how we then make those choices. Because ego is all about the self. When we read poetry, the id and the superego tend to be in the background. The voice of our speaker, who is going to stay separate from the voice of our poet. The voice of our speaker is the ego, the person trying to make a decision about what to think about life and how to act. That's it for now. You can proceed to any of the modules pertaining to this unit that you feel ready for. Good luck.